All right, so in today's lesson, we are going to talk about chapter 10C, and we're going to see how plants actually respond to environments, certain chemicals, and how we can, sometimes see this change occurring when they do respond. So, you may not have noticed this, but plants actually move, and they move because of a response that they have to their environment. And they can do this whether it's by, opening and closing of their stomata, which we talked about. Remember, stomata is the tiny openings on the bottom side of leaves. And so they can open and close this depending on the temperature. So like I always say, if you have a desert plant, when it's really hot during the day, they will close their stomata so they're not losing water. And then at the night time, when it cools down, they will open it up to allow exchange. And then a cool thing is plants actually can grow in a specific direction depending on what factor. So some plants that really need sunlight, you can notice that they're growing towards the sunlight, maybe towards a window or towards a light bulb, then then they would normally not respond. So, when we talk about a plant responding to its environment, the vocab word that we're going to learn is tropism, okay? So, tropism is how a plant responds to its environment. So, this is an important word for you to know, so make sure you highlight it, underline it. Again, it's the growth response of a plant based on its environmental factors. So, when a plant is growing towards a factor in its environment, it's going to have a positive tropism. So, for example, if I have a plant that's growing towards a light bulb, that is showing positive tropism. But if a plant is growing away from a factor, it's showing negative tropism. So, say I have a light source right here. So, it can be the sun or it can be a light bulb. In this case, I'll say it's a sun. And if I have a plant, let's do it in green, that is growing towards the sun, okay, this is showing positive tropism. But now say that I have the sun again over here, and I have a plant that is growing away from the sun. This is showing negative tropism, okay? So the environmental factor or the factor itself is our sun. The sun is playing the role of the factor, and so whether the plant grows towards the sun, showing positive tropism, or away from the sun, showing negative tropism, those are both responses that the plant is actually having. So there are specific types of tropisms that we're going to talk about. The first one is called phototropism. You can kind of tell in the name photo what it means. So this is when a plant is going to grow because of its response to light. Okay, so photo, think about photosynthesis, has to do with sunlight. This is when a plant responds to light, so that's really important as well. So what is positive tropism? Positive phototropism. This is when you have a plant stem and its leaves that are going to move toward the light. Okay, so in this specific sense, it could be a light bulb, a sun, it could be the sun. And what happens is the plant actually has something called auxin, which we talked was a growth hormone in the last section. And the auxin is going to be located more so on the side that is shaded of the plant. And it's going to cause an overproduction of this hormone. So as the auxin is on the side of the shaded plant, it's going to have cause the plant to grow more and more on that side, and so it will cause the plant to get heavier and heavier on the opposite side. Therefore, the plant will be growing towards the light. Okay. So like it says here, the cells of the shaded side will grow longer, and this will cause the plant stem to bend toward the light source, and then this will allow the plant to receive more light for photosynthesis. Okay, so if I have sunlight here, like I said, and I have, say, this like ginormous leaf, this side over here is getting more sunlight, and this side over here is not getting as much sunlight. So the auxin is going to start building up on this side right here, and as it builds up, it's going to cause the leaf to get heavier on this side right here, and so it will cause the leaf to bend this way, and it will be bending towards the light source, and therefore you have positive tropism occurring in the plant. So this is an example and a much better diagram than I drew. So you have the light source, that's this light bulb right here, that we are seeing in phototropism. And you have your plant right here, and we're looking at a simple leaf. So you can see how the cells on this, if you look at the leaf right here, this is before, the cell is leaning towards the light. So say the light bulb is off, you're gonna have auxin kind of evenly distributed on both sides. But now when you turn the light bulb on, the auxin is going to increase on the side that is more shaded, which is right here. And so there you have a lot more auxin that's going to be built up on this side. And when that starts to build up, the plant is starting to grow, the cells will get longer or elongate, and it's going to add more weight so that the leaf will start to kind of lean towards the light source, which is on this side right here. And so the plant itself will start to tilt more towards the light source and show phototropism happening. There's another type of tropism called thigmotropism. And what this is a plant's growth in response to touch. Yes, that is actually a thing. So when you have positive thigmotropism, this is when you have something like what this picture is showing you. This green part, the green plant right here, this is your pea plant. And it's close to some kind of tree. And so what's happening is this pea plant is actually starts to make contact with the tree and starts to wrap around that tree, or it could be a wooden peg or something like that. And it starts to show that it's responding to the touch of the peg or the stake or whatever it is, or tree. And this is showing positive thigmotropism. So anytime you see a plant responding to touch, this will show you positive thigmotropism. Another type of tropism is gravitropism. This is when you have a plant's response to gravity. Now this is really cool. So when you have a plant, so say I have my little plant right here, and I have roots. Remember, gravity is pulling down. This is a direction of gravity, okay? So when I have roots, it's actually going in the direction of gravity. So roots grow downward, therefore they're going to show positive gravitropism. But if you look at the leaves and the stem, they're actually growing upward, which is the opposite direction of gravity. Therefore, they're going to be showing negative gravitropism. So I'm going to say it again. When you have roots, they grow downward, the same direction as gravity. So they're going to show positive gravitropism. But your leaves and the stem of the plant grows upward, which is against gravity. Therefore, it's going to be showing negative gravitropism. So make sure you know the difference between negative and positive, and make sure that you understand why it is that way. We're going to look at a diagram, this diagram that I'm going to talk about in just a second. But before we get to there, I want to talk about this thing. So if I have a pot of tulips that I'm going to show, and it's placed on its side, okay? So say the pot is laying on its side. The tulips are actually going to, and they, if I plant, so say I have a pot, I plant some tulip seeds and I place the pot on its side rather than right side up. And as a tulip starts to grow, it's actually going to grow in a kind of a weird way, because it's going to grow according to the effect that gravitropism is going to have on it. So let's see what this would look like. So here I have my pot laying on the side, and you can kind of tell that the tulips are actually growing upward, okay? So the flowers, the stem, the leaves, they're all growing upward. So remember, we said that gravity has a downward pull on it. So this is, oops. So this is the direction of gravity. So if gravity is going down and the roots, the flowers, the leaves, and the stem are growing up, we can see negative gravitropism happening right here. Okay? Because it's going in the opposite direction of gravity. But what do you think is going to happen to the roots? The roots are actually going to start to grow this direction. And therefore, if they're going in the same direction as gravity, they're going to show positive gravitropism, which is really, really cool how gravity does affect the growth of plants. There's another term that we need to know, and this is called nastic movements. This is when you have a reversible or repeatable plant movements that keep occurring, and therefore they're called nastic movements. So this can be, the reason we have nastic movement is because of changes that are occurring in the turgor pressure of plants. So we're going to talk about an example of this, but just remember this vocab word, nastic movement, which has to do with a plant that's doing the same kind of movement over and over again, or it can be reversible, and it has to do with the way that turgor pressure is involved. So how does this happen? How does nastic movement happen? Well, when you have a plant, they have special cells at the bottom of the petals or at the bottom of the leaves that can actually harden or stiffen and then can also release as well. And it all depends on turgor pressure. So turgor pressure can cause a plant, remember turgor pressure is when you have the central vacuole of the plant filled with water. So what happens is turgor pressure can, when it's full, will make the leaves kind of branch out a little bit more because they look more sturdy. But when they're not full, they're going to look wilted and kind of, fall in on itself. And so when you have these changes between being sturdy and wilted, you're going to have movement occurring. So this happens when you have a Venus flytrap. A Venus flytrap can actually be triggered by touch. So if you touch a Venus flytrap, they can actually close. And what happens is the Venus flytrap, they have these tiny hairs on the outside. So they kind of look like this, and they have these like tiny hairs on the outside. So when they're open, and say they're open, they're waiting for a meal, and say that a poor little fly lands on the Venus flytrap and touches the little hairs. The little hairs actually have turgor pressure in the side of the cells, and the turgor pressure will cause the Venus flytrap to close shut, and it will eat the fly and digest its it will digest whatever the fly is made up of, especially nitrogen, and it will use that as an energy source for it. The same thing with tulips. Tulips have nastic movements because when they have lots of sunlight, they will open up because of the turgor pressure in the petals, and when there isn't enough sunlight, they will actually close up when it gets darker, and that's because of the way that the turgor pressure moves as well. So here is an example of a Venus flytrap. You see this fly is sitting in the trap because the Venus flytrap actually secretes this almost like sweet nectar. And the sweet nectar attracts these flies. The flies will land on it. It will touch the tiny hairs. The tiny hairs will have turgor pressure towards the bottom. And it will cause the Venus flytrap to close, trapping the fly, and then they will be able to literally suck the nitrogen out of the insect and able to digest it for an energy source. Okay, the next type of tropism we're going to talk about is a little bit different than the thigmotropism, phototropism, gravitropism that we talked. This is called photoperiodism. Basically what this is when you have a plant that is responding to light, but it depends on how much light is given. So for example, there are some plants that need a lot more daylight than other plants who need a lot more nighttime. And so based on the amount of sunlight that they get during the day or the amount of nighttime that they get at night, it will tell them how they will produce the flowers or fruit that they have. So what is the definition of photoperiodism? It is a plant's response to the length of time it is exposed to light. So let's talk more about this. So depending on how much light a plant will get, will tell you if the plant will produce flowers or a fruit. There are these special pigments that a plant has called phytochromes, and they are the ones that actually control photoperiodism, okay? So I'm gonna say that again. There are special pigments called phytochromes, which I have right here. These are the ones that are going to control photoperiodism. So these are what going to be sensitive to either light being present or light not being present. So there are some plants called long day plants, and then there's some called short day plants, meaning long day plants like to have a lot of sunlight in order for them to bloom. So you can see that this, it looks like some kind of tulip or something. They bloom when there is more daytime available. But a short day plant, like this dandelion or mums or whatever, they work better when there's more nighttime. Therefore, they like shorter days. So short day plants are like your apples, violets, ragweeds, poinsettias, and soybeans. They like to bloom when their days are shorter and their nights are longer. Okay, so short day plants, like it says in the name, they like shorter days and longer nights. Your long day plants, like your lettuce, your clovers, a lot of your grains, they like to have long periods of light and short periods of darkness. So they want as much light during the day as possible in order to really thrive well and to produce whatever fruit or flower that they are involved with. Then there's also something called day neutral plants. Kind of like the title says, these can bloom or produce fruit no matter what the condition is. So they're not favorable towards a lot of daytime or a lot of nighttime. They can pretty much grow and produce whatever they need to, no matter how much light or darkness that they get. So for example, roses, dandelions, tomatoes, cotton, these are all examples of plants that can bloom whether they have short days or short nights. Now, there is a period of time where, if it doesn't get dark early enough or light early enough, it's called the photoperiod. If this is off by even 10 minutes, this can actually affect plants and they will not produce a fruit or flower that they're supposed to. So you really have to pay attention to this, especially farmers when they plant certain types of plants and vegetation. They have to plant it at the right season, at the right time, because if they don't, plants cannot produce what they're supposed to due to them not being able to get supplied with what they need, such as sunlight. Okay, so that ended chapter 10C. So now we're going to do the quiz review. So let's go over some of the terms that we learned. We learned about thigmotropism, which we said was the response that a plant has to touch. Example, we talked about the pea plant. And then when you have positive thigmotropism, you are talking about a plant like the pea plant was growing around the stake, so it's actually responding well to touch. Then we talked about gravitropism, which is a plant responding to growth, responding to gravity, and therefore grows that way. So remember, roots, they go down in the direction of gravity, so they show positive gravitropism. And then stems and leaves, they go in the opposite direction of gravity, therefore they show negative gravitropism. Then we also talked about phototropism, which is when a plant will grow responding to light. Okay, so photo, like photosynthesis, they all require light. Photo usually means some type of light. So plants that respond with positive phototropism will grow towards light. Plants that show negative phototropism will grow away from light. Then we also talked about nastic movement. This is when you have a reversible or repeatable plant movements. And this is going to be controlled by turgor pressure. So turgor pressure can be strong or not so strong, and therefore it can control the movement of the plant. This is an example with the Venus flytrap. If remember, we talked about the hairs. If a fly lands on the Venus flytrap and touches the hair, it can cause the Venus flytrap to close because of the turgor pressure that gets triggered. We also talked about photoperiodism, which is when you have a plant responding to the amount of light it is getting. And this is controlled by phytochromes. So phytochromes are the pigments that are actually controlling photoperiodism. So this is when we talked about that, there are some plants that like to have lots of light during the daytime, and therefore they bloom better that time. And then there's some plants that prefer nighttime. So the plants that prefer more night than day are called short day plants because they like to have shorter days, longer nights. And then the plants that like to have longer days, so more sunlight, they are called long day plants. And then we also have ones that are kind of in between called the day neutral plants. They don't really care how much light you get during the day or the night or how much darkness you get at night. They can pretty much bloom whenever they want to. And that's it for your Chapter 10C quiz review. Good luck on your 10C. And that will also conclude Chapter 10, Chapter 10. So we will be doing a quiz review and some supplemental things like your study guide so that you are prepared for your test.